Hello everyone, Phil Snyder, course.Utah.com. Hey, today I'm going to do another great video. Today's video will be on general firearms familiarity. And this is another video that's going to be attached to the 2024 Utah Concealed Firearms Permit refresher course. This is something that's probably should have been covered in your initial class to some degree. We're going to go into quite a bit of detail on single action, double action revolvers, semi-automatic handguns, how they operate, how to clean them and field strip them, maintain them. We're going to go over the different kinds of ammunition and a lot of other things in the video. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask that if you would like to, pause the video and go get your handgun, and I can kind of walk you through some of these things. If you need some help with it, make sure you've got no ammunition anywhere in the room. Make sure you've got a cleared firearm, and anyway, we can do some loading and unloading exercises as well as clearing some common pistol malfunctions and things like that. So let's just get started. What are the 3 rules of gun safety? There's 3 main ones in the NRA, and there's a 4th one in the Utah Concealed Firearms Permit course, and that would be, number 1, you always want to have the gun pointed in a safe direction. The muzzle of the gun is where the bullet comes out, and you would never want to have that covered or flagged by anything that you're not willing to destroy or you cannot afford to replace. The finger right here should never be on that trigger until you've made the mental decision to fire and your sights are on the target. Then you can come on that trigger. A good finger placement on the gun when you're not firing is right along here on the frame of the gun. It shouldn't be anywhere in here in this trigger guard. Right now, my finger is not touching the trigger, but it's still in there. And if I see that, I'm going to say, hey, where's your finger? Bring your finger back out here. Having it in here, even though it's not touching the trigger, just tells me you're probably not aware of where your finger is. The other rule is you don't want to load guns until you are ready to use them. And you always have to assume that a gun is loaded until you competently prove otherwise that it's not. So even if a good trusted family member or friend tells you, hey, check out my new gun. Is it unloaded? Yeah, it is. You don't take their word for it. No offense to them, but you check it for yourself. And then know your target and what is beyond. It's not just what I'm shooting at, but you need to be aware of what is in the background of what you're shooting at, because you're liable for every bullet that comes out of your barrel. And I once heard a personal injury lawyer say every bullet that comes out of that barrel that's not accounted for that hurts a person is good for $1 million for each bullet. So being aware of crossfire and being aware of your shooting environment is very important for obvious reasons. So how do you check a gun to make sure it's clear? I've got a gun in a holster here. So the first thing you would want to do, if you got your gun out here with you for the video, you would want to pull this gun out of the holster with your finger off the trigger. First thing you're going to do while you got it pointed in a safe direction, you're going to take that magazine out. The way I did that was I just took my finger on that magazine release and it drops that magazine. The next thing you want to do when you're clearing the gun is you want to cant this gun to the right, and this is a forward facing camera, so it's going to show me turning it left, but it's actually right, so everything you're going to see me do is going to be opposite. And then you're going to rack that 3 times. You're going to take your hand behind the ejection port on the gun, and you're going to rack that back 3 times. I didn't see a gun cartridge, pistol cartridge come out, and that's a good sign, but we need to lock the slide back. and check that. And how you lock that slide back is you take your thumb and see that little slide stop? You hold that up with your thumb. You got to keep that pressure up. And then as you pull the slide back, it's going to catch into that little notch cut out on the slide. So I pull that back, and then I can inspect inside of my chamber to verify that that pistol is unloaded. And it's really hard to see, but I think just saw it on there. If I put that chamber, there's a little hole in there, and that's where the bullet goes. And so if you had a cartridge in there, you would see that. Flashlights are a really good tool to have to look inside of that chamber. Take a flashlight, shine it into that chamber, and then there's a little hole in there, and that's how you can tell that the chamber's empty. I've got a dummy round. I'm going to set that into that chamber. Had you had a loaded pistol, you would see that round in that chamber. So the gun is clear. Okay. Some parts to the semi-automatic handgun. This is a Glock Model 26. It's a 9mm. Holds a 10-round magazine. This is the slide of the gun. This moving part. This is your front sight. These are your rear sights. This is your trigger guard. Protects the trigger, like if the gun was dropped or something like that, it would keep the gun from being fired if it had one in the chamber. Trigger. This is the grip of the gun, and this, some people call this a beaver tail or a back strap, something like that. Slide stop, that's what I locked the slide back with earlier right there. This is a takedown lever. You'll see one of these on each side. And that's how you take the gun apart for cleaning. So the way you do that is on a Glock, you need to read your owner's manual on your handgun to know how it operates. Most people don't do that. But on the Glock, you have to pull the trigger. So the gun's pointed in a safe direction. Do that. Take your thumb and your index finger on the Glock, and if you pull down and you come over the top, and you pull that slide back just a tad, that slide will come off. And now you've got the frame of the gun right there. You got your recoil rod and spring. You got your barrel. There's the breech into the barrel where the bullet feeds into there. And then you've got your slide. This little hooked part, you see this right here. On this side, that's the extractor. That's what actually pulls out the casing of the gun. Shall we clean the gun? Let's do that. When you buy a handgun, you're going to need to buy yourself a gun cleaning kit. They're about 25 bucks. You can get something like this for, around $25. It's going to come with a cleaning rod. You're going to have a bore brush with a probably like a patch attachment to run patches through. You're going to get a separate bottle of solvent with some oil and some gun patches. You can use this, or I like to use this Ballistol product. It's a lubricant for metal, but it also cleans as well, and so I just use this one product. Whatever way you go is totally up to you. It's your decision. But usually, first thing I'll do is I'll take the brush here, and I'll just brush down this slide, and all the other parts. The brushes are good to get into these hard to reach areas like on the rails and things like that. You want to make sure you get that brush and get into that extractor. They get dirty, and sometimes if they get too bad, they won't extract your cartridge. Once you've ran everything with a brush, then you're going to take some solvent and you're going to spray it down into your barrel until it comes out. Okay, and then you're going to let that soak. While you're doing that, You're going to take some solvent, you're going to put it on a patch, and you're going to wipe down your slide. You're going to do the same thing on the frame of your gun. I'm not going to clean the whole gun just to make the video short, but you get the point. You know, your patches are going to get dirty. Just get a new patch, do the same thing, do repeat. Once that's all clean, you're going to get a bore brush. And you're going to run this bore brush through the breech end of the barrel. See, here's the feeding ramp, the front of the barrel. You're going to push that through. And you're going to row in and out, all the way out, all the way in, all the way out, all the way in. You're going to do that about, 5 or 6 times till you're satisfied. Then you can remove your bore brush. The patch rod here, and I'll run a patch through. Actually, I run 2 patches through here. And then I run this through the breech end of the barrel. And then I pull it through, and I'll kind of scrub that out. Just keep running patches through until they come out white. Once you've scrubbed your barrel out, put some lubricant on a patch. And then you're going to run this oily patch through your barrel. And that lines the coat of the inside of your barrel. Gives it a nice coat of oil in there. See how shiny that is? Looks like a mirror in there, right? Once that's all done and you've wiped down all of the exterior metal parts of your gun with oil. Remember, we've already wiped it down with solvent the first time. But after you've cleaned all your metal parts with solvent, you got to run over all the metal parts with oil on a clean patch. That puts a light coat of oil on your gun parts so they don't rust. And then you're going to read your owner's manual. It's going to tell you what particular areas of the gun need to have a drop of oil. And so your manual, make sure you read that. Usually typically they like 1 drop on the slide on the front and the back. And on your rail contact points on your gun. Just read your manual. It's going to tell you what to do. Once that's all done, you can put your barrel back into your slide. Take your recoil rod and spring. You've wiped this down with a patch and some oil. Same thing as the other things. I don't believe we did it, but you get the point. And then you're going to line this recoil rod and spring up. You don't want to have it crooked. You want to make sure that it's in there properly or you're going to have some problems. So just set that in there. It looks straight. And then you're going to line up your rails here on your slide with the front part of here. And then you don't want to force that. If it jams up on you, just kind of finesse it a little bit. That moves all that oil up and down the slide. Now once you've done that, you want to do a function check on the handgun to make sure the trigger assembly is working correct. And the way you do that is check it again, make sure it's clear, which it is. Pull the trigger. With the finger on the trigger depressed, see I haven't let go of the trigger? Pull that slide. That resets your trigger assembly. And then you watch my index finger here. I let that slowly out until I hear it click. And then stop there and pull the trigger. I'll do it again. Pull the slide back. Let that trigger out slowly till you feel it click. That resets. And then pull that out. I'm sorry, pull it back. That assures you that everything's working properly. Now, the way the semi-automatic handgun works is, semi-automatic by the way means 1 trigger pull, 1 round is fired. In the semi-automatic, it's magazine fed, and so you have to load the magazine of the gun first. And the back of the magazine is flat, and you can load these in wrong. So the back of the magazine is flat, and the front has more of a contour shape to it, right? And so when you're putting the cartridges in, you want to have the cartridge, the back of the cartridge here. There's the front where the bullet comes out, right? The back would need to be facing the back flat part of the magazine. And then you would need to push those in there in between these two metal lips. And you know, you can start this underneath here with your index finger, and then once it gets in between, you follow through and you push with your thumb. So I'll do that again. Take your index finger and push down here, and then follow through with that. And you might have some difficulty with this when you first start doing it. If you are, it might be easier to set it on your chest or something like that and load it like this. And the more you put in here, the more difficult it's going to be. But you get the point. Now, to load the semi-automatic handgun, first of all, if you're new to handling a gun, take the hard part of your hand and put it on your slide. Put your 4 fingers on the other side of the slide and do this. Pull that back and let it drop. You're going to feel the slide hit the wall and let it drop. That's how you load the gun. What I see commonly is people new with guns will grab it like this, and they don't want to make a lot of noise, and they'll let it down, and that's going to malfunction your gun, so you just want to drop it. But anyway, so when you're going to load the gun, you want to hold the magazine with your index finger just below the bullet there. Looks like this. And then you're going to insert this into the magazine well. And then you're going to give it a tap. That's important. Give it a good smack. Or you can cause malfunctions because sometimes the magazine won't seat in there properly. And to load it, I see people doing it with their fingers, but you know, that's a lot harder to grip the gun than, you know, having your whole hand on the slide. And you're going to pull that slide back. And you're going to let it drop. Now there's one in the chamber. And so the way the semi-automatic handgun works is, when you go to fire it, right, you pull the trigger on the gun, the firing pin hits the primer on the cartridge, which is that little piece that's in the center that's orange. That's called the primer. And that primer's job is to spark the gunpowder charge. The gunpowder charge is sitting here in the casing. And that spark that ignites the gunpowder charge creates an explosion inside of the chamber. And the explosion pressure causes this slide to come back and eject that empty cartridge, and then it brings the next one in line from the magazine up into that feeding ramp into the barrel. And then you fire another shot. Boom. Those explosive gases, that pressure, forces the slide back, extracts the other round, cycles that next round. So the semi-automatic uses the slide and the pressure from it to eject those empty cartridges when you fire them. And it'll just keep going as fast as you can pull that trigger until your gun is empty. Now I'm going to empty this gun with the snap caps. Gun is clear. Now let's talk about gripping the semi-automatic handgun. The grip of the pistol and the trigger squeeze is the most important part of accurate shooting. If you don't have a good grip on the handgun, you're not going to have a good trigger squeeze. The grip stabilizes your trigger. So grip is something to work on. One thing you don't want to do when you are gripping a pistol on the semi-automatic, you never want to have your hand behind this slide. Because when you go to fire it, that slide's going to come back, and if your thumb's in the way, it's going to hurt you. And you're going to get stitches. So the proper grip on the handgun, number one, on the semi-automatic, you want to be all the way up on the back strap here. And this is my trigger hand, right? The one that pulls the trigger. And then my support hand is just coming over here. And I'm taking this support hand over here. And I'm pulling it back. And I'm locking that wrist in. And so it looks something like that. Trigger hand, the one that pulls the trigger, the shooting hand, some people call it. And support hand. Like I said, that left wrist is pulling upwards and it's locking back. And you should feel the palm of this hand pushing onto the palm of this hand. They should be pushing together. Like that. A lot of people, when they start out with handguns, they grip it down here like this. That's too low. You want it up here. And when you pull the trigger on the gun, you want to slowly squeeze that trigger until you feel the trigger break. And then you can dry fire the gun practice like this without having to go to the gun range. Pull the trigger again slowly. Don't anticipate when the gun's going to go off. Right? Like that. Don't jerk the trigger and slap the trigger like somebody owes you money. You're just pulling on it. And that gun should not move when you're pulling that trigger. Let's talk about sight alignment. Sight alignment is the proper alignment of the front sight up here in relation to the rear sights. And so you would want to put the front sight in the center of the rear sights to where you see all three are equally in line and there's equal space on each side of the front sight that's sitting in between the rears. And so this is a 3-dot sight system. The front sight has a dot and the rears have a dot. Some, like factory Glocks, they have a U shape on the back and a circle on the front, a dot. Doesn't really matter, but they all have to be aligned properly. So if we look at this illustration on this target, let's say that I was shooting center mass for this target right here. I'd want to put the front sight in the center of the mass. And so it would look something like this. The front sight would be center mass. And then the rears would look like this. To where the three sights were evenly aligned on the top and the bottom. And there is about equal space in between here. If you had the front sight above the rears, your shots would be too high. If it was down here, they would be too low. If you didn't have equal space and you had this sight, was way over here, that would mean that the gun was pointed too far to the right and your hits would be over here. And same thing, if I've got something like this, it's going to be misaligned the other way. So you want to make sure that those are equally aligned. As far as shooting stances go, here's a chart. This is a typical isosceles stance where the feet are about shoulder width apart, the knees are slightly bent. This is a bench rest shoot right here, and so, you know, I don't usually bench rest unless I'm maybe trying to zero an optic on my sight, or I'm shooting a rifle at long distances, something like that, where I want to keep the gun steady. It's basically a sitting down isosceles. You just find something to put under your hands to support your hands, keeps that gun steady. And then if you're going to shoot with one hand, you want to have the support hand either in your pocket, or you could just have it up here out of the way. So, you know, it's not going to get shot when you're doing your shooting. There is a modified isosceles, and that is if you wanted to put a foot back like a boxer would do. Let's say that I'm right-handed. From this isosceles, you could take that right foot back a little bit and be into that modified isosceles. If you were a left-hand shooter, you would put the left foot back. And anyway, experiment with those and find out which one you like the best. So I'm going to go into this modified isosceles. I got my right foot back. And when I'm doing some target practice here, right, you're going to bring out those sights in front of your dominant eye. And my dominant eye is on this side over here. And I'm going to line up my sights on my sight picture, which is my target. And once that is done, the NRA teaches to take a deep breath in and hold. So I'm going to go. And then I'll let it out about halfway and hold while I pull the trigger. I'm going to hold. I'm going to exhale. I'm going to take another breath. Let it out. I'm going to do a hold, another trigger squeeze. And then follow through means, you know, you realign your sight again because the gun recoils. You're going to take another breath. You're going to exhale and do another hold, another trigger squeeze. The NRA teaches to do the breath and hold because it minimizes body movement. And so that's why they tell you to hold your breath. Obviously, when you get through the basic pistol course and we do other training, we're not holding our breath anymore. We're, you know, point shooting and doing rapid shots and things like that. And we're not doing that anymore. But for basic pistol skills, when you're starting, and that's on your test with the NRA, that's what you do. One other thing. When you are selecting a handgun for the first time, if you don't own a gun yet, I strongly recommend that you rent a handgun before you commit to spending $500 or upwards $600 or more buying a handgun. Nothing worse than buying a handgun that you don't like and now you have to worry about selling it or keeping a gun that you're not happy with. And, you know, you can rent a gun for 20 bucks, okay? Maybe less, maybe more, depending on the shooting range that you go to. It's not that expensive. And in fact, you could probably strike up a deal at the gun dealer and ask them, hey, you know, if I decide to buy this gun, will you take off the rental of the handgun? And, you know, sometimes if they'll do that, they want to sell a gun. But first thing you're looking for when you buy a semi-automatic handgun, number one, you need to know what the purpose of the gun is for, okay? So if it's just a plinker for the desert, go buy yourself a 22. The rounds are really cheap. But if it's for self-protection, you probably want to get a 9mm or a 380 or, you know, a heavier caliber than that, right? And so, but when you're purchasing the handgun, first of all, you know, you want to make sure it's clear and then put the gun in your hand. And how does it feel in your hand? Do you like the feel of it? If it feels good in your hand, next thing you want to do, pull the trigger. Obviously, you want to check it first, you know, make sure it's clear, and then you pull the trigger. And when you're not trained on guns, you probably won't know the difference, but, you know, when you get more experience, you'll really appreciate a lighter trigger pull. But everything works good like there. The other thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you can lock that slide back. Because if you are inspecting the chamber, you have to lock the slide back, or if you get a double feed malfunction, which is what we'll talk about, you have to lock the slide back to clear it. And, you know, holding up that slide stop with that thumb and pulling that back takes a little bit of a muscle to do that in your hand. And some people, they don't have a lot of strength in their hands. Maybe they're older and they have arthritis or something like that. They find out very quickly that, you know, they can't lock that slide back. Some guns are more difficult to do than others. A lot of people like the M&P Shield Easy Slide because that slide is a lot lighter and it's a lot easier to manipulate that. But yeah, you have to be able to lock that slide back. And then we want to look at, you know, how easy is the gun to take apart to clean? I mean, a Colt 1911, most people don't know how to take it apart. It's a little bit more involved than, you know, a Glock. That's why I like them. They're so simple. You just pull the trigger and, you know, remove that slide. And then, you know, you want to, it wouldn't hurt to load up your magazine. Some magazines are easier to load than others. You know, the Sig Sauer magazine is harder to load than a Glock is a little bit. At least it is for me. But if you can do all that and it passed the tests and the price is right, go out and rent it and see how it shoots. You might not like the recoil of the gun. You might find that 9mm, you might find that's too much recoil, more than you want to deal with. And then you have to go back down to a 380. Then go rent the 380. That way you're not wasting money on a gun and you haven't even shot it yet. So that's really important. But that's kind of what you're looking for when you buy a gun. Some guns have night sights on them, okay? They glow in the dark like these do. You turn the lights out, it all glows in the dark. Let's talk about malfunctions and what to do. I'm going to load the gun. The gun's loaded, the gun's ready to fire, right? So let's say you're at the gun range and you fire a shot at the target. Time is on your side. You know, this isn't a self-defense situation. You pull the trigger and the gun doesn't fire. NRA says to hold the gun in a safe direction for 30 seconds in case you get a hang fire. And a hang fire is a delay in that primer igniting. Could take up to 30 seconds to go boom. So that's why we're holding it in a safe direction. Once that 30 seconds is passed, and we've ruled out we don't have the hang fire, the next best thing to do is to empty the chamber. So you're going to take your magazine out, you're going to clear your barrel, clear your chamber. Okay, it is empty. And then, you know, you're going to look into the barrel to see if you can see light outside. You can't really do that unless you know, point the gun at your face, and that's not a good idea. So you can take your little trusty bore snake and you can put that through the barrel and you can see that you don't have an obstruction. If you don't have one of these, you could just have to field strip the gun and take the barrel out of the gun and look up in it like that. So now I know I don't have a barrel obstruction. A squib load, S-Q-U-I-B, will cause a barrel obstruction sometimes. And a squib load is defined as a cartridge that has less than standard pressures of gunpowder charge in it. And it just doesn't have enough, it's not loaded to specs with enough pressure in it. And characteristics of a squib might be less recoil, less noise, less muzzle flash than what you would typically hear or feel or see. But you might not notice this. And so just because you don't have any of these characteristics of the squib doesn't mean that you don't have one. And so that's why you would want to still follow these protocols. Hang fires in 30 years or more around guns. Handguns, I've never seen one. I know black powder guns, typically you'll get hang fires with a lot. They're pretty common, but not really with, you know, center fire handguns, at least from what I've seen. Squibs do happen. They are more common, but even with a squib, if you buy factory ammunition from a factory that's not reloaded, you're a good reputation manufacturer, good reputable manufacturer like a you know, a Federal or Blazer or something like that, you're going to really reduce your chances of getting any of these. The other malfunction, which is what's the most common, is when you pull the trigger, that firing pin hits the primer and it doesn't spark because the cartridge is usually bad. Usually it's a cartridge issue, but it could be the, you know, the firing pin or something like that causing that. But anyway, those are your 3 malfunctions, and that's what the NRA teaches you to do as steps to make sure that you are the safest possible. I actually had a squib many years ago when I first started being around handguns, and the bullet was actually lodged into the barrel. And I had my brother with me, and he told me, hey, don't fire it. I think you've got a squib. And when we checked the barrel, there was a bullet that was lodged in there, and we had to take the barrel upstairs, and they put it in a vise, and we had to take a tap with a hammer and tap that bullet, push that bullet out the front end of the barrel to get it out. And so they can happen, and squibs can be very dangerous, and that's why the NRA recommends that you clear them this particular way to make sure that you're safe, because you know you could be blinded and you know ruin your barrel and things like that. Now let's talk about clearing misfires and other malfunctions like that when you're in a self-defense situation where time is crucial. So I'm going to load the gun. Okay. Now let's say that I'm shooting at an attacker that's coming into my home and I pull the trigger and nothing happens. Can I tell the bad guy, hey, time out, Mr. Bad Guy, I got to wait 30 seconds? No, they're not going to listen to you. So you have to clear the gun really fast. So in your Utah curriculum, they teach something called tap, rack, and ready. And you're doing this knowing that you could have a risk of a squib or a hang fire, but time is of essence, and we are going to take a risk that it's just a misfire. And what happens is after you pull that trigger, you're going to tap on that magazine to make sure it's in there properly, and then you're going to rack that slide. We rack the slide because we assumed that maybe the cartridge was bad. And by doing those two, that tap and that rack, we've ruled out 2 of the 2 reasons why that gun didn't fire. So let me do this a little bit quicker. I've got some more dummy rounds in here. You fire the shot, so it's bang, tap the magazine, rack the slide, and do this in your home with no ammunition. Tap, rack, bang, tap, rack. Now I'm out. When the gun's empty, that slide will lock back on you. And all you have to do is just to eject your magazine, put a fresh one in there, and you can go back. Tap, rack, bang. Practice that at home. Make sure you got no ammunition. Make sure you got a good safe room and a safe wall, and practice these drills. Go buy some of these snap caps. I don't know why they call them snap caps. They don't snap. They're called dummy rounds too, but buy 6 of these and, you know, have somebody load your magazine up at the gun range with mix them with some live rounds. And when you fire the gun, when it doesn't fire and you have that dummy round in there, you can practice this tap rack. That's something that we do on a live range. The other benefit of that, practicing the tap rack on the range, is it tells you and your instructor, if you have one, what you're doing when you're pulling your trigger. You know, are you anticipating recoil and pulling it down, or are you muscling the gun and moving it when you're pulling the trigger? It's very helpful for you, an instructor, to tell you what some of your shooting errors are, what your trigger work looks like, and things like that. Another really important thing when you're shooting is to always, as part of that follow through, something that I didn't mention earlier, make sure that as part of that follow through that your grip still looks good when you're shooting. You know, I'll see people start out and they got a really good grip, and then the third or the fourth shot, you know, they're down here like this, or, you know, they got their thumbs up in the air. You want to use the same consistent grip every time you shoot. And remember to bring that sight up in front of your dominant eye, okay? You don't want to, you know, bringing your head down and looking down the sights, because that takes precious time. So you want to bring that sight up to your dominant eye and pull that trigger. Let's do an eye dominance exercise. Take a little triangle and put it in front of your face. And put an object that's on the wall. Get a picture frame or something like that, or a clock on the wall. And put your hands around that item. And I'm going to do my nose. And then you close that right around that item. And then with one eye open at a time, you're going to close your left eye. And I close that left eye, and, you know, and I can still see it, that item. That means that's my non-dominant eye. And then if I open my left eye and I close my right eye and I do that, wow, where the hell did it go? That means that right eye is my dominant eye, okay? So whatever eye that you close and that item on the wall goes, and you can't see it anymore, that's your dominant eye, and that's the one you want to keep open. If you're going to close an eye, that would be the one that you would keep open. Okay, so remember, if you close an eye and it's unaffected, like this one, it doesn't affect it, you could keep that eye closed if you want to. Now, it's ideal to keep both eyes open when you shoot. I'd prefer you have them both open, because you got a better field of vision in your peripheral here. I close this eye over here, and I've just knocked out a lot of my vision for other threats that might be lurking around and things like that. And so, you know, that's called the eye dominance exercise. Let's talk about ammunition. Ammunition should always be stored in a cool, dry place, away from heat and cold extremes, room temperature, away from moisture and solvents and water and things like that. Ammunition will last you a very long time. I mean, I've got ammunition that's almost 50 years old, and it's been stored properly, and it's, you know, it was military surplus stuff that I bought, and it's fine. But, you know, I think the manufacturers will warranty that for about 10 years, but, you know, it lasts a lot longer if you store it properly. I always recommend that you, at least I do this, and the police department did this, we would rotate our ammunition once a year. We would shoot up our year-old ammunition, and then when we were done, we would clean our guns. They would give us some fresh hollow points, and then we would go back to work. It's always nice to know what your protection ammo feels like when you shoot it. Plus Ps and hollow points and defensive ammo have more recoil to them typically, and they're louder, and so it's really good. And the accuracy is different, so it's really good to shoot that stuff to know what you're dealing with. Now, every gun is caliber specific, obviously, so you couldn't shoot a 9mm and a 45, right? And so you would want to keep your ammunition separately, right? And so let's go over the cartridges. So the first one that I use for protection is a hollow point. See that hollow tip? And this is a Plus P cartridge. I don't know if you can see on there. It looks like you can now, but on the head stamp of this cartridge, it'll tell you 9mm, like this is a 9mm, it should say 9mm. And this is a Plus P cartridge. Plus P means extra pressure, plus pressure. Bullets moving a little bit faster. And so, but the purpose of the hollow point, when it hits the target, it expands, right? It mushrooms out. And the purpose of that is, number one, it doesn't over penetrate through walls and bodies and things like that as much as a full metal jacket would do, that I'm going to show you here in a minute. So it's going to be, you know, less likely. I mean, it's still going to go through walls and through bodies and things like that, but not as much as the other one, the full metal jacket that I'm going to show you. And for that reason, I use hollow tips for self-defense. Now, you can find the cartridge caliber On the head stamp, as I mentioned earlier, your owner's manual will tell you what caliber of gun you have. Your box will usually say it on there. You will also see on your ammunition box, it'll tell you the caliber and the load, 9mm Luger. And it'll also say it typically on the slide of your gun somewhere, or on the barrel, stamped here on the barrel somewhere. You just want to make sure all that lines up. But the 9mm and most self-defense cartridges are center fire cartridges. And what that means is the primer is center of the cartridge, right? And the anatomy of a bullet is the primer, the casing, which is this silver part, nickel part. The gunpowder charge is inside, and the bullet is on the tip. And I believe we talked about that firing sequence, right? You know, you pull the trigger on that gun, that trigger releases a spring-powered hammer or a firing pin or a striker on a Glock, and it punctures that primer right there. And that primer sparks that powder charge, and those combustible high-pressure gases is what causes that explosion, as we mentioned earlier, and pushes that bullet out of your barrel about 1,100 feet per second. And then you have cartridges that are called full metal jacket. They don't have the hollow tip. These over-penetrate. These penetrate more. And so I use these for the range. You'll hear this, people call this target ammo or practice ammo. This is what I use for the practice. Now, I suppose if I was up in the backcountry in the woods where I had four-legged predators like bears and things like that, and big cats and things like that, maybe I would want to switch out a round of full metal jackets because they over-penetrate through that bear's skull that's trying to kill me and things like that. And so that'd probably be a better option for you. But, you know, if you're in the woods for protection, okay, maybe you want that. But if you're in the hood, right? Maybe you want something like a hollow tip, so it's not going to have a risk of going somewhere where you don't want it. And then this is a 22 long rifle cartridge, and this is called a rimfire. And on the rimfire, the primer is on the outer rim edge of the cartridge, and that's what they call rimfire. So those are your different ammunitions. Now let's go over the single action revolver. Cowboy revolver right here. Single action means that the trigger has one action. It releases the hammer. And so on a single action revolver, it has to be cocked in order to fire. So we're going to check this gun to make sure it's clear before we start messing around with it. And the first thing you want to do is you've got a little loading gate. And you're going to open up that loading gate, and it's going to expose the cylinder. Once that cylinder is exposed, if you click this hammer back 2 clicks, 1, 2, it's going to unlock that cylinder to where you can see inside. And basically you just turn that cylinder around. Now I know the gun's clear. But in order for this gun to be fired, you have to cock it back to fire it. So you have to cock it back, pull the trigger. Now if I want to fire another shot, see, it doesn't do anything, right? Single action means the trigger just drops the hammer. So I have to cock it to fire the single action. Like that. Now, to decock the gun, we showed you how to cock it, right? We pulled that hammer back. That's cocking. The only way to decock the gun is you have to pull the trigger. And so you want to make sure you got your thumb securely placed on that hammer. And not a bad idea to stick your finger in there in case your thumb slips off. And you're going to pull that trigger, and then you're going to slowly release that hammer. Do it again. You don't want to have your thumb slip off of there and fire the gun. Now this gun's got a mechanical safety on it. If you pull it down, red means fire. There's a red button there. I don't know if you can see it. And if you push this safety up and cover that red dot, you see what it did to the hammer? I don't know if you noticed that. Let's do it again. Watch the hammer here. Take the safety off. And it basically, the safety blocks the hammer. And it's supposed to not fire, but you obviously wouldn't want to rely on a safety because it's a mechanical device and it can fail. And so the parts on the single action revolver are pretty much the same as a semi-automatic, other than instead of having a magazine fed gun, you've got a gun that has to be loaded by a cylinder. Okay, this cylinder is what holds the rounds. And then you've got an ejector rod, which you don't have on a semi-automatic gun, and that's how you unload it. I'll show you here in a second. So to load this single action revolver, open your loading gate, click this back 2 clicks. That unlocks the cylinder. And then I'm going to put some snap caps in, dummy rounds. And then you're going to put those in that cylinder one at a time. And then you're going to rotate it. You're going to put the next one in. And you're going to put the next one in until you get all 6 of them in there. Looks like I got one more that needs to go in there. There, now it's loaded. See those in there? Once it's loaded, close your loading gate, cock it back to fire it, take your safety off, pull the safety down, and you're ready to fire. Now when you're ready to unload the gun, 2 click, put your safety on when you're going to unload it. 2 clicks back, 1, 2. That unlocks your cylinder. Open your loading gate. And that exposes the cartridge, right? You're firing them all. And then you're going to take your extractor and you're going to push that cartridge out. And then you're going to go to the next one. And then check it. Turn it 2 or 3 rotations. Gun is clear. Once the gun's clear, put your safety on. Actually, safety is still on. That is a single action revolver. Double action revolver. This is a Taurus Tracker 44 Magnum. This thing will put a damn grizzly bear down. Hit this thing in the skull and it'll neutralize it and kill it. Going to make sure the gun's clear really quick, which it is. You can see in the cylinder's empty. Okay. Chamber's empty, cylinder's empty. Double action means the trigger does 2 things. It cocks the hammer and releases it. And so the double action, you can actually fire it by pulling the trigger. Remember the other one, you had to cock it? So you could just pull the trigger because the trigger cocks and releases the hammer. Or you could pull it back and fire it too, like the other one we did. Now, when you're pulling this double action mode, it's about 11 pounds of trigger pressure, trigger pull. If you fire it with the hammer back, it's about 4 pounds. So I recommend that when you shoot these double actions, cock it to fire it each time. Notice the cylinder rotation. Watch the cylinder when I cock it. See how it rotates? You want to be familiar with how that cylinder rotates. And the reason it's important is if, let's say that you were going into a state that, like Utah, for example, if you are under 21 years old and you don't have a firearm permit, the law actually requires you to have the gun statutorily unloaded, and it would need to be open carry for those people that are under 21 without a license. And so essentially it would make this 5-shot revolver a 3-shot, because you would need 2 empties. Because the Utah law, the way it reads is, it says a gun, no matter what kind it is, whether it's a revolver or a semi-automatic, the chamber, the one that's in the firing position, always has to be unloaded, and it needs to be in a condition to where it requires 2 mechanical actions in addition to that chamber being empty in order for it to fire. So, because that cylinder rotates when you pull the trigger, see, it rotates 1, or if you cock it. So if I was that 18 to 20-year-old, and if I wanted to carry this revolver statutorily unloaded, I could only put 3 cartridges and leaving me 2 empties. And what you would need to do is you would need to set this up to where, and you can do that by turning this, you would need to have this empty aligned up here. And then you would also need to one have immediately next to it empty, because of that, when you pull that trigger and it rotates 1. So, you know, if I pull the trigger and I had only one empty, watch what happens. I pull the trigger, that cylinder rotates, and on that 1 mechanical action, it would fire. Even though that top position was empty, because of that rotation, that's why you would need that empty, because I've had 1 action now, and now that second action would cause it to fire. And so that's how you would, if you were concerned about that, you know, you were, like I said, you were that under 21-year-old, then that's how that would look like in a revolver. So in a revolver, to unload it, instead of having that that ejector rod on the single action, you've got this is called the cylinder release button. And so what you do is you push that forward, and then you can push this barrel out, or the cylinder out. And then to unload it, you would just push on this ejector rod, and that's going to push those out. And now the gun's empty, and now you can close that. Decocking, same thing. The only way to decock these is to pull the trigger. And so, you know, you got to have a good grip on that hammer. And, you know, when you're getting used to this, you know, put a finger in there. And that way, if your thumb slips off, the gun doesn't fire. And then like that. Okay. Now, revolvers like this Cops were carrying these in Utah up until 1991. Typically a 38 Special or a 357 Magnum, something like that. And they would carry, you know, 2 speed loaders on their belt. And so they had a 6-shot in here loaded. They would carry them loaded. And then if they had to reload in a gunfight, you know, they would, you know, fire all 6, and they would have to dump these empty shells out. And then they would grab a speed loader, right? It's not a speed loader, but the speed loader would have, you know, 6 more bullets if this was a 6-shot. And then they would have to take that speed loader and, you know, align those cartridges up and turn it, and it drops all 6 of those in at a time. Which gun is right for you? I mean, the obvious answer is semi-automatic, but some people may prefer to have a revolver. And I've had people that have taken the concealed weapons class and they prefer a revolver. So let's talk about that. What are the advantages of having a revolver? Number one, you might have some health conditions, or you don't like having to lock that slide back, and, you know, with a revolver, you don't have a slide on it to deal with, having to lock that slide back. The other advantage of having a revolver would be they're more reliable when they're firing, okay? There's less chance of, you know, having a malfunction and things like that with a revolver. They're pretty simple. You just put the cartridges in, and usually, you know, the gun just fires. Semi-automatics, you know, they're a little fussy sometimes. You know, if you shoot the gun limp-wristed, you know, you don't have a good solid grip on the gun, that can double feed a semi-automatic. So, you know, these are, you know, deemed to be more reliable. Now, let's talk about the semi-automatic, the advantage. Number one, there's such a thing called firepower. A better term for that would be continuity of fire, right? Obviously, semi-automatics have more continuity of fire, right? I mean, you know, typical, you know, like a Glock 19 semi-automatic 9mm handgun's got a 15-round magazine plus 1. And then if you've got a couple of spare mags on you, 15-round mags, okay, you've got 46 rounds of firepower for protection. If you've got that same revolver, if you're carrying a revolver, you've got 6, you've got a couple of speed loaders, you've got, what, 18 versus 46 rounds. So you've got, you know, 3 times the amount of cartridges that you're carrying on you for protection. Now let's talk about reloading time. How long do you think it takes to reload a revolver with speed loaders versus how much time it takes to reload a semi-automatic handgun, just having to grab a magazine and shove it in there and reload? Anybody want to guess? It takes the average person under stress 3 to 5 seconds to reload a semi-automatic like this. Anybody want to guess what that time is on a revolver? Try 9 to 15 seconds. So would you rather have a reload time of 9 to 15 seconds under stress with a revolver, or cut that down 3 to 5 seconds under stress with a semi-automatic? Also, studies have shown through the police department that they did studies when officers transitioned from the revolvers to the semi-automatic handgun, and because of the better grip angle on the semi-automatic and the less recoil that they usually have, shooters usually improved 20 to 40% when they switched over to the semi-automatic. Their marksmanship skills improved 20%. One thing I forgot to show you on the revolver was the grip. I mean, we showed you this grip on the semi-automatic earlier, right? Well, that grip looks a little bit different on the revolver. That grip on the revolver is, you know, you want to be as high up on this strap as you can. And then you take your support hand thumb and you put it over the firing thumb and you curl them down out of the way. And so that grip on the revolver looks like this. Versus, you know, in the semi-automatic, that thumb is on the top, that firing thumb. And the revolver, you know, it looks like this. Right? One thing I almost forgot. So if you've got a revolver that you're cleaning, it's pretty much the same principles that we showed you earlier, where to clean. However, when you're cleaning a revolver with the brush, you need to run through the front muzzle end of the barrel. Okay, that would be the difference. Remember on the semi-automatic, we came in through the other way, but you know, that's not possible because of this. And so when you're scrubbing that barrel out, that's what that looks like. And also, you also want to run a brush through your cylinder holes because those get, you know, gunpowder in there. And so you would want to run that brush through there as well. But it's the same principle. You know, as far as function check goes, yeah, I suppose you could, you know, cock it and decock it, cock it, decock it, make sure that's good. Pretty darn close to closing up the general firearms familiarity course on all the different types of handguns, that single double action revolver and the semi-automatic handgun. Okay, I just hope everybody can be safe with the gun, and I would say probably once you've taken a concealed carry class, the first thing you ought to be doing is go out and get yourself a holster, okay? Have a plan how you're going to carry. I don't care if it's conceal or open carry. Find yourself a good quality holster. Don't go buy something really cheap. Spend a little bit of money. Quality does matter on this, and come up with a carry plan of how you're going to carry. And so that's what the Utah Concealed Carry course is for. Is it's designed just enough to get you in trouble, right? It doesn't require any live fire range training. Classroom only, gets you a license in Utah, but you know, I think that's a joke, and I really strongly recommend that you invest a little bit of time and money and take at least a basic pistol course from a qualified instructor. Having a good instructor will really make a big difference, and it's not really that much money. One thing that we do that's really good is we will support our students in any amount of firearms training that they would like to have. We can take them as far as they'd like to go. If you want to be a competition shooter, you know, well, I don't do that. But the NRA basic pistol course, as we mentioned in the other video, is a really good starting point for your journey. But even that isn't enough. I really think that the Concealed Firearms Permit course through Utah, the reason that it's not perfect is I think the base of the course should be around the gun, right? It should be you knowing how to function that gun, how it functions and how it works and what it's finicky about and fussy about and things like that. Get to know your gun. Because if you don't know how to run your gun, you're going to fail when you need it most. So you need to know how to do that tap and rack and clearing double feeds and stovepipes. And by the way, we didn't go over that, so that would be one more thing. But know how to run your gun. And the NRA basic pistol course is just, it's a minimum. Just so the instructor knows that you're carrying safely and, you know, you can shoot a target at 10 feet. Little 4-inch groups is what we do. And that is required, is a prerequisite to take our other courses. I have a 2-day pistol course that we run people through. We're going to do some night shooting in the dark on an outdoor range. We're going to know what it's like to use flashlights with your gun. You know, and you're going to light up your target in the dark. You're going to need that flashlight to actually see your target. And if you've got night sights in your gun, you're going to see these little glow in the dark little sights, but you need to know what it's like to shoot in the dark, whether that's out on the street, something happens, or you're in your home when you've got a burglar. Just a good experience. We have a stress shoot as part of that 2-day course. We're going to run you. We're going to get your heart rate going up a little bit, depending on your age, right? We're not going to give you a heart attack, but we want to elevate your heart a little bit and get you under a little bit of stress to see how you perform under stress. And then we have a battlefield pickup test, okay, that we do. And then we have a regular qualification where we shoot 15 yards in with the handgun. And I really liked what we did with the police department. And this 2-day course is similar, but not near as detailed as the one that I took through the police. The handgun course that I took through the police was a 40-hour course just on the handgun alone with 1,500 rounds. Okay, that was 3 full 8-hour days on the range shooting those 1,500 rounds, night shooting, stress shooting, daylight shooting, practicing those pistol malfunctions and those stress drills and things like that. I really like that, but it's hard to get civilians in for that much training, number one, because of the cost and the ammo count that you need for a course like that, but the time. People don't want to commit 40 hours to training. Most people don't want to do that. And so I think 16 hours course is a good compromise with that. And that is a 250 round course minimum for that 2-day course. And so I think 250 rounds is a bare bones minimum that you need to really get comfortable and acquainted with your gun and, know how it fires and really getting used to it, because the baseline of any concealed firearms permit course should be around the gun and getting comfortable with it, right? And then once you're comfortable with it, now you can start carrying it on your body and getting used to that. And then it's knowing when to use the gun for self-defense, when it's appropriate and legal to draw it on somebody in self-defense, right? The appropriate legal use of the firearm. And then the accuracy comes, and that would be like the third piece of this, right? So as you can see, the Utah Concealed Firearms Permit course on its own doesn't do that, right? And so that's why we recommend the 16 hours of training. So let me just break for a minute and let me show you the how to clear the double feed and the stovepipe, and then we'll be done. Double feed. Pain in the ass. You got one in the chamber, and then you've got another one that came up from the magazine and tried to go in there. And so you've got a double feed situation. And the procedure to clear this is, the sheriff's office taught us this, and I thought it was kind of silly actually, trying to make us remember this shit. But it was lock, rip, rack, 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 tap, rack, ready. Try saying that 3 times, right? So it's lock the magazine, lock the slide back, and that gets the pressure off of the magazine. And then you rip the magazine out, and then you cant the gun to the right. I know this shows left, but it's to the right so that cartridge can come out easier with gravity. And you rack, 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 right? And then you tap, inserting the magazine in, and then you rack, and then you're ready. That's the double feed. Double feed. One more time. Lock, rip, rack, 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 tap, rack, ready. Stovepipe to be caused by maybe if you unload it with the gun turned the wrong way to the left, or if you're shooting it limp-wristed, something like that, cause that stovepipe. Stovepipes are really easy. All you have to do, tap, rack, ready. One more time. Stovepipe, tap, rack, ready. Thanks for watching.